Pregnant Apache girl was drowning. Lonely rancher saved her and saw his wife's tribal blanket. Pregnant Apache girl was drowning. Lonely rancher saved her and saw his wife's tribal blanket. Before we begin this captivating tale from the American Old West, I'd like to personally invite you to join our storytelling community. If you enjoy this story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and share in the comments where you're listening from. Whether you're tucked away in a cozy apartment in New York, relaxing on a beach in California, or perhaps even listening from another country entirely, we'd love to know. Your support allows us to continue bringing these emotional human journeys to life. Now settle in as we transport you to the rugged landscapes of the Arizona Territory in 1885, where an unexpected encounter between two worlds will change lives forever. The Arizona Territory, 1885. The merciless summer sun beat down on Thomas Calloway's weathered face as he rode the fence line of his modest cattle ranch. At 42, time had etched deep lines around his eyes, partly from squinting against the relentless desert sun, partly from the grief that had hollowed him out these past 3 years. The ranch sat nestled in a valley, 30 miles from the nearest town of Copper Springs, with the imposing silhouette of the Dragoon Mountains marking the eastern boundary of his property. It was good land, hard land, but Thomas worked it alone now. The neighboring ranches had all but written him off as a ghost, a man who died alongside his wife Sarah when the fever took her in 82. "Come on, Hank," Thomas murmured to his chestnut quarter horse. Let's check the North Creek before heading back." The creek that cut through his property was the lifeblood of the ranch, especially during these brutal summer months. Recent rains in the mountains meant the water was running higher than usual, churning muddy and fast. As they approached, Thomas noticed something unusual caught against the fallen cottonwood that bridged the creek, a splash of color against the muddy waters. Thomas dismounted, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver on his hip. The Apache reservation was less than a day's ride to the northeast, and relations between settlers and the native tribes remained tense despite the uneasy peace. As he drew closer, his heart hammered against his ribs. It was a woman, an Apache woman, her body half submerged in the rushing water, unconscious and clinging to the fallen tree. Her dark hair swirled around her like ink in water, and her dress, sodden and torn, revealed the unmistakable swell of pregnancy. "God Almighty," Thomas breathed, holstering his weapon and wading into the creek without hesitation. The cold water shocked his system as it soaked through his worn denims. He reached the woman just as her grip on the tree began to fail, catching her before the current could claim her. Her eyes fluttered open briefly as he lifted her, dark, frightened eyes that locked with his for just a moment before closing again. She couldn't have been more than 20. With considerable effort, Thomas carried her to the bank and gently laid her on the dry ground. It was then that he noticed the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, faded red with intricate geometric patterns woven in black and white. His breath caught in his throat. The pattern was unmistakable. His wife Sarah had owned one almost identical, a gift from an Apache woman she had once helped in town. Sarah had cherished that blanket, draped it over their bed every night until the day she died. Thomas's hands trembled as he checked the young woman's pulse, finding it weak but steady. Her skin burned with fever, and a gash on her forehead suggested she'd been injured before ending up in the creek. But it was the blanket that held him transfixed, like a message from beyond the grave. "Stay with me," he said gruffly, gathering her into his arms again. "I'm taking you to safety." As he whistled for Hank and carefully mounted with the woman secured against his chest, Thomas felt something stir within him, something he thought had died with Sarah, a sense of purpose, perhaps, or maybe just the uncomfortable weight of responsibility. Either way, as he rode back toward the ranch house with the unconscious woman, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that his solitary existence was about to change, for better or worse. The blanket's pattern seemed to pulse with meaning, though he couldn't yet decipher what that meaning might be. The lonely ranch that had become his prison was about to become something else entirely. For 3 days and nights, Thomas tended to the young Apache woman as she drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams. He bathed her forehead with cool cloths, managed to get some broth between her cracked lips, and kept vigil from a chair beside the bed, Sarah's bed, which he hadn't slept in since her passing. On the morning of the fourth day, Thomas returned from feeding the livestock to find the woman sitting upright, her dark eyes wary but alert. The blanket was pulled protectively around her shoulders, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "You're awake," Thomas said, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her. "That's good. I was beginning to worry." She regarded him silently, her gaze taking in his weathered face, the small cabin with its sparse furnishings, and finally settling on the wedding photograph of Thomas and Sarah that sat on the mantel. "My name is Thomas Calloway," he continued, speaking slowly. "I found you in the creek, half drowned. You've been here for 3 days now." After a long pause, she spoke, her English accented but clear. "I am Nayu of the Chiricahua Apache. Why did you save me, white man?" Thomas moved to the kitchen table, pouring a cup of coffee for himself and water for her. "Any decent person would have done the same," he said, offering her the water. "Are you hungry? I can make something." Nayu accepted the water but didn't drink immediately. "Your wife," she said, nodding toward the photograph. "Where is she now?" "Gone. 3 years now. Fever took her." The words came out clipped, practiced from repetition that didn't lessen their sting. Something softened in Nayu's expression. "I am sorry for your loss. It is hard to continue when those we love go to the spirit world." Thomas cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the sympathy. "Your blanket," he said, changing the subject. "My wife had one very similar. An Apache woman gave it to her in town years ago. Sarah helped deliver her baby." Nayu's fingers traced the pattern on the blanket. "This was my mother's work. She was known for her weaving." Her eyes widened suddenly. "Your wife? Her name was Sarah? The healer woman with hair like sunset?" Thomas stared at her, his coffee forgotten. "Yes. How did you—" "She saved my sister's life. My sister, Casa, and her son. My mother gifted her this pattern in gratitude." Nayu clutched the blanket tighter. "My mother made only 4 blankets with this design, one for each of her daughters, and one for the white healer woman who showed kindness when others showed only hatred." Thomas sat heavily in the chair beside the bed, the coincidence too great to be mere chance. "How did you come to be in my creek, Nayu?" he asked softly. The young woman's face darkened with remembered fear. "I fled from the reservation. My husband died in a raid 6 moons ago. His brother claimed me as his wife, as is our custom." Her hand moved protectively over her belly. "But he is a cruel man, with hatred in his heart. When he discovered I carry my dead husband's child, She trailed off, her expression haunted. "He hurt you," Thomas finished for her, anger rising in his chest. Nayu nodded once. "He said the child would be born weak, like its father, that he would leave it on the mountainside once it was born." Her voice remained steady, but tears welled in her eyes. "I could not allow this, so I ran 3 nights ago, but his trackers followed. I hid in the hills until the storm came. The waters rose quickly. I thought I would die, but then—" She looked at Thomas with newfound understanding. "Then you found me. You're safe here," Thomas said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "No one will harm you or your child while you're under my roof. They will come looking," Nayu warned. "My husband's brother is called Tahaze, Fierce One. He will not surrender what he believes is his." Thomas stood, moving to the window to scan the horizon out of habit. "This is my land. Anyone who comes meaning harm will answer to me." He turned back to her. "Can you tell me how far along you are?" "The child will come with the harvest moon," she said. "At less than 2 moons from now. 2 months, Thomas calculated. 2 months until her child would be born, and who knew how long until this Tahaz tracked her to his doorstep. He had avoided entanglements with his neighbors, with the town, with everyone since Sarah died. Now he was harboring a pregnant Apache woman, defying tribal custom and possibly territorial law. Yet when he looked at the blanket around her shoulders, the twin to the one Sarah had treasured, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that his wife had somehow orchestrated this from beyond. Sarah, who had never turned away anyone in need. Sarah, who had believed that kindness was never wasted, even in a land as harsh as the Arizona Territory. "Rest today," he said finally. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." As he turned to leave the room, Nayu called after him, "Thomas Calloway." He paused at the doorway. "My people believe that nothing in this world happens without purpose, that our paths are woven together like the threads in this blanket." She touched the geometric pattern. "Perhaps your wife guides your path still." Thomas didn't respond, but as he stepped outside into the punishing sunlight, the weight on his chest felt marginally lighter than it had in 3 long years. Word traveled fast in the Arizona Territory, even to a remote ranch like Thomas's. A week after finding Nayu, Thomas rode into Copper Springs for supplies, only to find himself the subject of suspicious glances and hushed conversations that died as he approached. "Morning, Sheriff." Thomas nodded to the lawman as he tied his horse outside the general store. Sheriff Miller, a bull-necked man with a graying mustache, stepped down from the boardwalk. "Thomas, been a while since we've seen you in town. Been busy with the ranch." "That's so." Miller rocked back on his heels. "Heard you've got yourself a guest out at your place. Indian woman." Thomas kept his expression neutral. "News travels fast. Jenkins spotted her when he was riding past your south pasture." The sheriff lowered his voice. "Look, Tom, I know you've kept to yourself since Sarah, and that's your business. But harboring an Apache woman, a runaway from the reservation, that's everyone's business. She was injured, nearly drowned in my creek, and now she's healed up, I take it." Miller's hand rested casually on his gun belt. "Army patrol came through yesterday, said there's an Apache buck raising hell about his woman running off, threatening to break the peace treaty if she isn't returned." Thomas felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "She's pregnant, Frank. The man she's running from threatened to kill her child once it's born. That's their way, not ours to judge." Miller sighed. "I've known you 20 years, Tom. You're a good man, but this territory's hanging on peace by a thread. One ranch, one man ain't worth risking that peace. So I'm just supposed to hand her over, send her back to be beaten or worse." The sheriff removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm giving you friendly warning. Army patrol will be back through in 3 days. Indian agent with them. They'll be stopping by your place." He replaced his hat. "Whatever you decide to do before then, that's between you and your conscience." Inside the general store, the usual friendly chatter from proprietor Samuel Wilson was replaced with terse efficiency as he filled Thomas's order. As Thomas waited, a woman's voice called his name. "Mr. Calloway." "Thomas Calloway." He turned to find a petite woman in her 30s, regarding him with intelligent eyes. Her practical dress and the medical bag at her feet marked her as someone unexpected in a frontier town. "I'm Dr. Rebecca Hayes," she said, extending her hand. "I took over Dr. Bennett's practice when he retired last spring." Thomas shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "Ma'am, don't believe we've met." "No, we haven't. I've heard about you, though." She glanced around the store, then lowered her voice. "And about your guest. I understand she's with child." Thomas stiffened. "I'm not sure that's anyone's concern but hers. As the only physician within 50 miles, I'd say it's very much my concern." Dr. Hayes picked up her bag. "I'm riding out to the Peterson place this afternoon to check on Mrs. Peterson's rheumatism. Your ranch wouldn't be much of a detour." Thomas studied her face for any sign of deception, but found only professional interest. "The Army's taking an interest in my guest, doctor. Might not be wise to get involved. The Army's interest is political. Mr. Calloway, mine is medical." She straightened her shoulders. "I took an oath to care for the sick and injured regardless of race, creed, or circumstance. I intend to honor that oath." Something in her direct gaze reminded Thomas of Sarah, the same unflinching commitment to doing what was right, regardless of consequence. He nodded slowly. "We'll expect you before sundown, then." Later that afternoon, Thomas watched from his porch as Dr. Hayes's buggy approached. Nayu had been apprehensive about the doctor's visit, but her concern for her unborn child outweighed her fear of another white stranger. Dr. Hayes proved to be as efficient as she was forthright. She examined Nayu thoroughly, speaking in simple, respectful terms and demonstrating with gestures when language failed. "The baby is positioned well," she told them afterward, washing her hands in the basin Thomas provided. "Strong heartbeat. But Nayu is malnourished and exhausted. She needs rest, good food, and no more running." She fixed Thomas with a pointed look. "And I understand that might be difficult to arrange. Sheriff told you about the army patrol. The whole town's talking about little else." Dr. Hayes dried her hands. "The Indian agent coming with them is Benjamin Crawley. Nasty piece of work. Takes bribes from traders to look the other way, while they sell watered-down whiskey on the reservation." Thomas frowned. "And you seem well informed for someone new to these parts. I treat Apache patients when they're allowed to seek help outside the reservation. I hear things." She packed her instruments carefully. "Mr. Calloway, I don't know what your plan is, but if Nayu returns to the reservation in her condition, I fear for both her and her child." From the bedroom doorway, Nayu spoke. "I will not return. I would rather die in the desert." Dr. Hayes turned to her. "No one's sending you back if I have anything to say about it." She hesitated, then continued. "I have a brother in Colorado. He works with a Quaker mission that helps Native people. If you could get to Denver, they could offer protection, perhaps even help you establish a new life away from here." "Denver's more than 500 miles. Thomas objected. "She can't make that journey in her condition. Not now." "No," Dr. Hayes agreed. "But after the baby comes, perhaps. The important thing is keeping her hidden until the army patrol leaves." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "And how do you suggest I do that? They'll search the ranch? Not if there's nothing to find." Dr. Hayes looked between them. "Does anyone else know exactly where on your property she's staying?" "No. Sheriff just said Jenkins spotted her from the south pasture, then move her today. You must have line shacks, hunting cabins, somewhere remote even on your own land." Thomas thought for a moment. "There's an old trapper's cabin up in the foothills. Used it during winter hunts. But it's rough. No one would think to look there this time of year." "That's perfect," Dr. Hayes said decisively. "Get her settled there tonight. I'll return in 3 days, after the patrol has come and gone." As she prepared to leave, the doctor pressed a small package into Thomas's hands. "Medicinal herbs. Brew them as tea for Nayu. They'll help strengthen her and the baby." Thomas walked her to her buggy. "Why are you helping us, Doctor? You're risking a lot." Rebecca Hayes smiled sadly. "Before I came here, I worked at a reservation in South Dakota. I watched the army separate families, take children from their parents, punish people for practicing their traditions." She shook her head. "I came west to start fresh, not to watch the same injustices play out again." After she left, Thomas quickly prepared supplies for Nayu. As the sun began to set, they rode double on Hank, taking a circuitous route through the foothills to the trapper's cabin. The small structure was dusty and spartanly furnished, but solid enough to provide shelter. "I'll bring you food every other day," Thomas told her as he lit the cabin's single oil lamp. "Stay inside during daylight, no fires except at night, and keep them small." Nayu settled onto the narrow cot, the ever-present blanket around her shoulders despite the summer heat. "Would you risk much for a stranger, Thomas Calloway?" "You're not exactly a stranger anymore," he replied, feeling awkward under her steady gaze. "Besides, seems like you and Sarah already had a connection through your family. Can't ignore that. The whites I have known speak of coincidence," Nayu said softly. "The Apache see the hand of the Creator in such things." She touched her rounded belly. "My child will need a protector in this world. Perhaps the Creator has sent you." Thomas busied himself arranging supplies, uncomfortable with the weight of expectation in her words. "I'm just trying to do right by you until you're strong enough to decide your own path." As he prepared to leave, Nayu called after him. "The woman doctor, she has a good heart like your Sarah." Thomas paused at the door. "Yes, I suppose she does. And you, Thomas Calloway, is your heart healing or still bleeding?" The question caught him off guard. For 3 years, he'd avoided thinking about his heart at all, focusing instead on the numbing routine of ranch work and solitude. "I'll be back in 2 days," he said, avoiding her question. Stay safe. As he rode back down to his ranch under a canopy of stars, Thomas realized he'd spoken more words in the past week than he had in the previous year. The silence he'd wrapped around himself like armor was slowly cracking, letting in complications, dangers, and perhaps something else he wasn't ready to name. The army patrol arrived exactly when Sheriff Miller said they would, bringing with them a cloud of dust and tension that settled over the ranch like a thunderhead. Thomas watched from his porch as 5 cavalrymen, the sheriff, and a thin, sallow-faced man in civilian clothes dismounted in his yard. "Mr. Calloway," the lieutenant in charge nodded stiffly. "I'm Lieutenant Collins. This is Mr. Crawley, Indian agent for the San Carlos Reservation." Thomas nodded back, offering no welcome. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Benjamin Crawley stepped forward, his ill-fitting suit stained with travel dust. "We're looking for an Apache woman. Pregnant, ran away from her rightful husband about 2 weeks ago." His eyes darted past Thomas to the cabin door. "Do we have information she's been seen on your property?" "That's so." Thomas leaned against the porch post. "And who provided this information?" "That's not your concern," Crawley snapped. "We have the authority to search these premises. The woman is tribal property and subject to reservation law." "Property?" Thomas straightened, anger flaring. "Since when are people property in this territory?" Lieutenant Collins intervened. "Mr. Calloway, we're not here to debate policy. We have a situation brewing at the reservation. The woman's husband, brother-in-law," Thomas corrected. Collins's eyes narrowed. "So you admit you know of her?" Thomas cursed himself for the slip. "I know what I've been told, that a pregnant woman is running from a man who threatened her and her unborn child. That doesn't sound like a situation the United States Army should be facilitating." Sheriff Miller sighed. "Tom, don't make this difficult. If she was here, just tell us where she went. Save everyone a lot of trouble. Search if you need to," Thomas replied evenly, "but you won't find anyone here but me." For the next hour, the soldiers methodically searched the ranch house and outbuildings, while Thomas watched with forced calm. They found nothing, of course. Nayu was safely hidden in the trapper's cabin 2 miles away in the foothills. As the search concluded, Crawley's frustration was evident. "She's here somewhere. The Apache brave who wants her back. Tahaz, he's not a man to cross. He's got half the young men on the reservation riled up, threatening to leave the reservation if she isn't returned." "Sounds like a problem for the reservation," Thomas said coolly. "Not for me." Lieutenant Collins studied Thomas thoughtfully. "You know, Calloway, I looked into your background before coming here. A former scout for the Army during the Apache Wars. Distinguished service. Then you settled down, married, built this place." He gestured around at the ranch. "A man like you understands duty. Understands that sometimes personal feelings have to be set aside for the greater good." "The greater good," Thomas repeated. "Is that what we're calling it now when we force a woman back to a man who'll kill her child?" Crawley spat into the dust. "And their savage ways aren't our concern. The peace treaty is our concern. One squaw isn't worth risking that." Thomas's hand twitched toward his sidearm before he controlled himself. "I think we're done here, gentlemen." "Not quite." Lieutenant Collins nodded to 2 of his men, who brought forward a frightened-looking young Apache man from where they'd been holding him by the horses. "This is Keela, cousin to the woman Nayu. He's agreed to help us find her." The young man couldn't meet Thomas's eyes. His face was bruised, suggesting his agreement had come at a price. "Cale knows his cousin's ways," Crawley said with a smirk. "Says she would seek high ground, near water but hidden. Says she always favored the mountains as a girl." He turned to Thomas. "Any places like that on your property, Calloway?" Thomas kept his expression neutral despite the cold fear gripping his heart. "The dragoons are full of such places, but my property ends at the foothills." "We'll be searching those foothills all the same," Lieutenant Collins stated. "With Keel's help. If we find she's been hiding on your land with your knowledge, there will be consequences." After they rode out, Thomas waited only long enough to saddle Hank before taking a roundabout route to the trapper's cabin. He had to warn Nayu, perhaps move her even deeper into the mountains until the search party gave up. But when he arrived at the cabin, he found Dr. Hayes's buggy already there, and both women in a state of alarm. "They have Kale," Nayu said as soon as he entered. "My cousin. He knows of this place. When we were children, our fathers brought us hunting in these mountains. I know, Thomas confirmed grimly. They're using him to track you. We need to move you immediately. Rebecca Hayes was preparing a medical kit. We can't move her. Her labor has started. Thomas stared at Nayu, who was breathing heavily on the cot, her face contorted with pain. But it's too early. You said the baby wasn't due for another month. The stress, the running, the poor conditions, they've triggered early labor, Dr. Hayes explained. The contractions began this morning. I came to check on her and found her like this. How long do we have before the baby comes? Thomas asked, moving to the cabin's single window to scan the approach. First babies often take time, but there's no way to know for certain. Hours, most likely. And the search party? They were heading up the eastern slope when I passed them, Dr. Hayes said. That gives us some time, but not much. Thomas made a quick decision. I'll lead them away. Create a false trail heading west, toward the border. It might buy us a day or two. And if they don't follow? Dr. Hayes challenged. If they separate and keep searching these foothills, then I'll have to convince them. Thomas checked his revolver and rifled through the cabin's sparse supplies, taking rope and a canteen. Nayu reached out to grasp his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong despite her condition. Do not harm my cousin. He is innocent in this. I'll do what I can, Thomas promised, but my priority is keeping you and your child safe. As he prepared to leave, Dr. Hayes followed him outside. This is escalating beyond what any of us anticipated. Mr. Calloway. Call me Thomas, he said, tightening Hank's saddle. Seems we're well past formalities. Thomas, then. She touched his arm. I admire what you're doing, but have you considered the aftermath? Even if we deliver this baby safely, even if you lead the search party away, what then? Where can Nayu go that she'll truly be safe? Thomas had been avoiding this very question for days. One problem at a time, Doctor. Let's bring this child into the world first, then we'll figure out the rest. Rebecca, she corrected with a faint smile. As you said, we're past formalities. Her expression grew serious again. Be careful, Thomas. Men like Crawley and this Tahaz, they don't value life the way you do. For the next several hours, Thomas created an elaborate false trail, using tricks he'd learned during his scouting days. He scattered personal items of Nayu's that he'd brought from the ranch, a hair comb, scraps of cloth, making it appear she'd fled westward in haste. As dusk approached, he positioned himself where he could observe the search party's camp from a distance. They had split into two groups, he noted with concern. Lieutenant Collins and two soldiers were following his false trail, while Crawley, the remaining soldiers, and Kaylee continued to search the foothills. Thomas circled back, approaching their camp after nightfall. He needed to get Kaylee alone, to either warn him or, though he hated to consider it, prevent him from leading the others to the cabin. Fortune favored him. Kaylee had been tied to a tree at the edge of camp, separated from the others who sat around a small fire. Thomas approached silently from behind, clamping a hand over the young man's mouth before he could cry out. I'm not here to hurt you, Thomas whispered. I'm trying to help Nayu and her unborn child. Kaylee's eyes widened with recognition, then narrowed in suspicion. She's in labor, Thomas continued. The baby is coming tonight. If Tahaz finds her now, you know what will happen. Slowly, Thomas removed his hand. Kaylee remained silent, glancing toward the men at the campfire. Tahaz said he would kill me if I did not help find her, Kaylee whispered finally. He has already killed my father for helping Nayu escape. Thomas felt a surge of sympathy for the young man, caught between impossible choices. Help me protect her, just for a few more days. Then she and her child will be gone from here, somewhere Tahaz can never find them. Kaylee considered this, conflict evident in his expression. The white doctor woman, she is with Nayu. Yes, she's helping deliver the baby. Good. Nayu will need a skilled healer. Kaylee made his decision. I will lead them west tomorrow, following your false trail. But you must swear to me that you will get her far from here once the child is born. I swear it, Thomas said solemnly. There is something else you should know, Kaylee added, his voice dropping even lower. Tahaz is not at the reservation waiting. He follows with his own hunting party, a day behind the soldiers. They do not know he comes. This news chilled Thomas to the bone. If Tahaz was pursuing Nayu with his own men, the situation was even more dangerous than he'd thought. How many ride with him? 5 warriors. His most loyal. Thomas nodded grimly. Thank you for the warning. I'll return to Nayu now. As he melted back into the darkness, Thomas's mind raced with new urgency. The birth of Nayu's child was just the beginning of their challenges. Somehow, he would need to get a newborn infant and its recovering mother safely away from the territory before Tahaz could find them. And for the first time in 3 years, Thomas found himself praying, not just for their safety, but for guidance. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, with dangers on all sides. Yet as he rode through the night toward the trapper's cabin, one thought sustained him. Sarah would have done the same. Sarah, whose spirit seemed to hover just beyond his reach, guiding him back toward the light of human connection he'd abandoned when she died. Dawn broke over the Dragoon Mountains in a wash of gold and crimson as Thomas approached the trapper's cabin. The morning stillness was broken by a sound he hadn't heard in years, the thin, determined cry of a newborn child. He dismounted hastily, his heart pounding as he pushed open the cabin door. Inside, Rebecca Hayes was washing her hands in a basin, while Nayu lay on the cot, cradling a small bundle wrapped in clean linen. The exhaustion on both women's faces was tempered by an unmistakable joy. "You have a daughter," Rebecca announced softly as Thomas stood frozen in the doorway. Nayu looked up at him, her dark eyes shining despite her weariness. "Come, Thomas Calloway. Meet the newest member of this world." He approached awkwardly, removing his hat. The tiny face that peered out from the swaddling was copper-skinned with a shock of black hair, perfect in every detail. As he watched, the infant's eyes opened, dark, unfocused eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of her ancestors. "She is strong," Nayu said proudly. "She fought to enter this world just as she will fight to make her place in it." "The birth was difficult," Rebecca explained in a low voice. "But both mother and child are doing well. All things considered, they'll need rest, though, before they can travel." Thomas shared what he'd learned from Kayla about Tahaz's separate hunting party, about the borrowed time they now had thanks to the false trail. Rebecca's expression grew grave. "We need to get them to safety," she said. "My brother's mission in Colorado is still their best hope." "It's too far," Thomas objected. "Nayu can't travel that distance with a newborn, not with Tahaz hunting them." "There may be another way." Rebecca hesitated. "The railroad. The Southern Pacific line runs through Tucson. If we could get them there, they could be in Colorado in days instead of weeks." Thomas calculated distances in his head. Tucson's 100 miles south, still a hard journey for them. "But possible?" Rebecca insisted. "Especially if we had help." She met his eyes steadily. "I have friends in Tucson, people who've helped others in similar situations. If we could get Nayu and the baby there, my friends could ensure they board the train safely." "And what about the army? Crawley? They'll be watching the trains." "Not if they believe Nayu is heading for the Mexican border." Rebecca's expression was determined. "And Kale's diversion buys us time, but we need to act quickly." As they spoke, Nayu had been whispering to her daughter in Apache, soft words of welcome and promise. Now she looked up at them. "I have decided on a name," she announced. "She will be called Sarah." Thomas felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been struck. "Sarah?" Nayu nodded. "In honor of the healer woman who saved my sister's life, and in honor of the man who saved mine." She touched the tribal blanket that now wrapped her daughter instead of herself. "Our paths are woven together, Thomas Calloway. This child connects us to your wife's memory and to the future." Thomas turned away, overcome by emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. When he could trust his voice again, he said, "It's a good name. Strong." Rebecca had been watching this exchange with thoughtful eyes. "Thomas, there's something I've been considering. Something that might solve several problems at once." Both Thomas and Nayu looked at her expectantly. "Marry me," Rebecca said, her directness taking Thomas by surprise. "A legal marriage would give me the right to travel with Nayu as my domestic helper. No one would question a doctor's wife traveling with her servant and the servant's child." Thomas stared at her in disbelief. "Marriage? We barely know each other. It would be a marriage of convenience." Rebecca clarified, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I've received an offer to join a medical practice in Denver, where my brother's mission is located. I've been considering it for months now." She gestured around the small cabin. "You've been alone too long, Thomas. This ranch has become your prison, not your home. You're asking me to leave everything I've built here. I'm asking you to consider what you're really holding on to," Rebecca said gently. "Is it the ranch? Or is it the grief?" Nayu watched this exchange with knowing eyes, the baby Sarah sleeping peacefully in her arms. The blanket's pattern shows that all threads must connect to form the whole, she said. "One thread alone will unravel." Thomas moved to the cabin's small window, looking out at the mountains illuminated by the morning sun. For 3 years, he'd existed rather than lived, going through motions without purpose or joy. Now, in the space of 2 weeks, his carefully constructed isolation had been shattered by a drowning woman with his wife's blanket, a forthright doctor with challenging questions, and a newborn child named for the wife he'd lost. "And we'd need to move quickly," he said finally, turning back to face them. "Sell the ranch, settle affairs. It would take time we don't have." "Not necessarily," Rebecca replied. "You could appoint an agent to sell the property after we've gone. Sheriff Miller might not agree with our choices, but he's an honest man. He could handle the transaction and forward the proceeds." Thomas felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Something like hope, or perhaps the ember of a future he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. "And what about us? After we reach Denver?" Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "We proceed as circumstances dictate. Perhaps we find we suit each other, perhaps we don't. Either way, we will have done something worthwhile. Saved 2 lives and given ourselves a chance at something new." Before Thomas could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. He moved quickly to the door, peering out toward the trail. "Riders coming. At least 3, maybe 4. Tahaz?" Nayu asked, fear edging her voice as she clutched baby Sarah closer. "Can't tell yet." Thomas checked his revolver. "Rebecca, help Nayu prepare to move. We may need to leave quickly." As the hoofbeats grew louder, Thomas positioned himself outside the cabin, rifle ready. To his surprise, the approaching rider was Keeley, followed by Sheriff Miller. They were pushing their horses hard, urgency evident in their posture. "Calloway!" Miller called as they approached. "Thank God we found you!" "What's happened?" Thomas demanded, not lowering his rifle. "Tahaz," Kayla gasped, sliding from his horse. "He found the false trail. He knows it was a trick. His warriors have split up, searching every canyon and ridge." He looked toward the cabin. "My cousin, is she safe? The child?" "Both well," Thomas confirmed. "Sheriff, what are you doing here?" Miller dismounted heavily, his expression grim. "Crawley sent a telegram to Fort Bowie requesting additional troops. Claims you're interfering with reservation business." He shook his head. "I've known you too long to believe you'd risk so much without good reason." "And now?" Thomas asked cautiously. "Now, I'm here as Frank, not the sheriff." Miller's weathered face softened. "Sarah would have my hide if I didn't help." This unexpected alliance changed everything. With the sheriff's help, they could move Nayu and the baby more safely. With Kaylee's knowledge of Apache ways, they might avoid Tahaz's searching warriors. "D, we have a plan," Thomas explained quickly, "but we'll need your help to execute it." Inside the cabin, introductions were made and the plan refined. Sheriff Miller would create a distraction in town, reporting Apache raiders to draw Crawley and the soldiers away from the southern route to Tucson. Keel would scout ahead, ensuring their path remained clear of Tahaz's warriors. Thomas, Rebecca, Nayu, and the baby would travel by night, using Dr. Hayes's enclosed buggy. "One more thing," Thomas said, turning to Miller. "I'll need you to handle the sale of my ranch after we're gone. Forward the money to Rebecca's brother in Denver." Miller's eyebrows rose. "You're leaving for good, then?" Thomas glanced at Rebecca, who stood beside Nayu, helping prepare the infant for travel. "Yes, it's time for a new beginning. Sarah would be proud," Miller said gruffly, extending his hand. "She always said you had a good heart buried under all that stubbornness." By nightfall, they were ready. Baby Sarah, securely swaddled in her grandmother's tribal blanket, slept peacefully against Nayu's chest. The small party moved out under cover of darkness. following game trails and dry washes to avoid the main roads. Their journey was not without peril. Twice, they were forced to hide as Tahazi's scouts passed nearby. Once they took shelter in an abandoned mine shaft during daylight hours, the baby remarkably quiet, as if sensing the need for silence. On the third night, as they approached the outskirts of Tucson, Kaylee brought worrying news. Tahaze himself is close. He has picked up our trail. Thomas made a decision. Kaylee, take Nayu, Rebecca, and the baby the rest of the way to Tucson. I'll stay behind. Lead Tahaz away. No, Rebecca objected firmly. We stay together. This isn't negotiable, Thomas insisted. I can buy you the time you need to reach the railroad. Nayu, who had been listening silently, spoke up. Thomas Calloway, you have already done more than any man could be asked to do for those not of his blood. She approached him, carefully placing baby Sarah in his arms. But now you must complete what was started when you pulled me from the creek. You must carry my daughter to safety. What are you saying? Thomas asked, though he feared he already knew. I will lead Tahaz away, Nayu said with quiet dignity. He hunts me, not my child, not you. No, Thomas and Rebecca said in unison. Kaylee stepped forward. She is right, and she will not go alone. I will accompany her. He looked at his cousin with respect. Together, we will lead Tahazi far from here, perhaps into Mexico. By the time he realizes the child is not with us, you will be beyond his reach. Despite their protests, Nayu's determination could not be swayed. In the pre-dawn hours, with the lights of Tucson visible in the distance, they made their farewells. My daughter will know of her people, Nayu said, touching the sleeping infant's cheek one last time. You will tell her of the Apache ways, of her mother's courage. Promise me this. I promise, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. And this, Nayu removed the tribal blanket, wrapping it securely around her daughter. This connects her to her grandmother, to your Sarah, and to all that has brought us to this moment. She looked between Thomas and Rebecca. Take care of each other, as you will take care of my child. With a final embrace, Nayu mounted behind Kale. We will meet again, Thomas Calloway. If not in this world, then in the next. She touched her heart. The threads of our lives are now forever woven together. As they watched Nayu and Kaylee ride east, deliberately leaving clear tracks for Tahaz to follow, Thomas felt Rebecca's hand slip into his. She's the bravest woman I've ever known, Rebecca whispered. One of two, Thomas replied, meeting her eyes. By midday, they had reached Rebecca's friends in Tucson, a Quaker couple who operated a small mission at the edge of town. By evening, tickets had been procured for the eastbound train departing the following morning. As they sat in the mission's humble kitchen, baby Sarah sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle, the Quaker woman who had welcomed them placed a Bible on the table. I understand this to be a wedding before you depart, she said with a kind smile. Thomas looked at Rebecca questioningly. Their marriage had been proposed as a practical solution, a means to an end. Now, with Tucson behind them and Denver ahead, was it still necessary? Rebecca seemed to read his thoughts. The choice is yours, Thomas. We can proceed as planned, or we can find another way. Thomas looked down at baby Sarah, at the tribal blanket that had once belonged to his wife, at the unexpected second chance that had arrived on his doorstep in the form of a drowning woman. The grief that had been his constant companion for 3 years hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else, something that allowed for the possibility of future joy. I think, he said slowly, that Sarah would want me to choose life, to choose connection. He took Rebecca's hand. I can't promise to be the husband you deserve, at least not right away, but I can promise to try. Rebecca's smile was radiant. That's all any of us can do, Thomas. Try. The ceremony was brief. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, they boarded the train that would carry them to their new life in Denver. Thomas, Rebecca, and the child they had both pledged to protect. As the train pulled away from the station, Thomas held baby Sarah by the window, pointing out the mountains in the distance. That's where your mother comes from, he told the infant softly. Brave and strong, like you'll be. Someday, when you're older, we'll tell you the whole story. The baby's tiny hand emerged from the tribal blanket, grasping his finger with surprising strength. In that moment, Thomas felt a presence. Whether his wife's spirit or simply the connection of past to future, he couldn't say. What he did know was that the loneliness that had defined his existence was gone, replaced by purpose and the tender beginnings of something that might, with time and care, grow into love. As the Arizona landscape rolled past the window, the geometric patterns of the tribal blanket caught the morning light, each thread connecting to others to form a whole greater than its parts, just as their lives, once separate, now formed a new and unexpected family, bound together by courage, sacrifice, and the promise of tomorrow.